Hi, friends. Lauren here. And I am back with fresh episodes, starting with Dr. Alan Goldhamer. He'll be talking about water only fasting to reverse serious health conditions and for weight loss. Later, we'll talk about the pleasure trap, which explains how we are hardwired to do things that satisfy us in the here and now, but are not in our long term best interest and what we can do about it. I want to thank you, my listeners, for making Age Like a Badass Mother one of the top 10% of all podcasts. It's my honor that so many people are connecting to our guests and telling their friends about us. It honestly, it means the world to me. So thank you. And thank you to my producer, Vanessa, for working her butt off to make this podcast something that people will love. If you have any questions or comments or ideas, feedback, you can email me at lauren@agelikeabadassmother.com. And don't forget, you can watch us now on Spotify or YouTube. Thanks again for listening. Hi, friends. I'm Lauren Bernick, and I'm flipping the script about growing older. My guests have been influencers since before that was even a thing. Welcome to the Anti-Aging Podcast. Welcome to Age Like a Badass Mother. Dr. Alan Goldhamer is an expert in the use of medically supervised water-only fasting. He is the founder and has been the director of True North Health Center since 1984 and has supervised the fasting and care of more than 25,000 patients. True North Health Center is a multidisciplinary practice that includes doctors of medicine, osteopathy, chiropractic, naturopathy, and psychology. Its healthcare providers treat patients with conditions ranging from high blood pressure and diabetes to autoimmune disorders and lymphoma. The center is the largest facility in the world specializing in medically supervised water-only fasting and a premier training facility for doctors to gain certification in the supervision of therapeutic fasting. Dr. Goldhamer is the author of the Health Promoting Cookbook and co-author of The Pleasure Trap, Mastering the Hidden Force That Undermines Health and Happiness, and the new book, Can Fasting Save Your Life? He has helped author numerous studies and case reports published in peer-reviewed journals. He is a frequent lecturer, speaker on the use of fasting and diet in the restoration of optimal health. Please welcome Dr. Alan Goldhamer. Welcome.
Hi. It's nice to be here.
Good to have you. So, first, I want to just ask you a couple of personal questions,
Sure.
if that's okay. So, how old are you, Dr. Goldhamer? Because you
I'm
look stunning.
65.
You look fabulous. 65. Okay. What do you love about being 65?
Well, I got to be 65. I think that's a really sure beats the alternative,
Yeah, no kidding.
I have a 20-year-old grandson who calls me the AO. And I found out recently it stands for the Ancient One.
I won't say what I think of that.
Oh, yeah.
I can't believe you have a 20-year-old grandson. That's
Yeah, and I have a 14-year-old granddaughter. And so
that's crazy.
been around a long time.
Well, I'm not that far behind you. I'm 56, and I'm really enjoying this phase of life, I have to say. I have 3 kids. One lives pretty close by. One lives in Australia and one lives in New York. And since it's the holidays, my one from Australia is home, and we're going to pick the one from New York up at the airport. And I'm like, I love these kids, but God, having everybody under my roof, I'm kind of realizing like, that's kind of one of the good things about life is just being with your partner and going back to that phase of life where it's just like the two of you, or even if you're by yourself, just that, revisiting that phase of your life when it was just about you. It's kind of nice. I'm enjoying that part.
Well, I think that the grandkids is much more fun than the kids. If you could just skip right to the grandkids, that might actually be,
I know.
the easiest way.
Nobody's doing that though. My daughter's been married 6 years. I can't even bring that up. So she gets irritated with me. So we'll see, hopefully one day. But all right, well, let's jump into it. So, what? I'm curious what fueled your interest in health. Was your family like
really
this
young.
growing
I was
up?
fourth grade, I was getting frustrated even in elementary and junior high school. I used to play basketball. And my best friend, Doug Lyle, used to beat me just consistently. And I thought maybe if I got healthier, I could get an edge and I would be able to beat him. So I started reading books, and I read a book by Herbert Shelton that said that health was the result of healthful living, that it was diet, sleep, and exercise that determined health. And so I thought, well, I'll adopt a health-promoting diet and lifestyle. I'll get healthier, and therefore I'll be able to beat Dr. Lyle. It didn't work out because he adopted the same diet and lifestyle habits, and to this day, he still beats my butt every time we play. So it wasn't successful at getting me to beat Dr. Lyle, but it did get me interested in this whole area. And I was inspired by my uncle, who was a medical doctor, who at my 16th birthday was invited to my birthday by my mom because she was concerned I had adopted this vegan diet. He thought, she thought that might be a problem. And he told my mother not to worry about the diet. These kids go through different diets. And as long as I ate plenty of gefilte fish, I'd be fine.
Oh,
and I explained to my uncle that it was a vegan meant no animal products of any kind. And he said it was called being a Meshuggah, and I would stop it right that moment. And at the same party, I decided to announce to my family what I was going to do for a living. I decided to go into this alternative medicine field. He was irate. I thought I would actually see my first stroke because his veins were sticking out in his neck. And he said that I was not going to go into this field of alternative medicine, that nobody in our family would see a doctor like that, let alone become a doctor like that, and that better I should be a communist spy. So they finally got rid of him. And my dad, who was a very serious guy, took me aside. He said, son, I don't know anything about this alternative medicine, but anything that makes him that mad and angry, it can't be bad. So you stick to your guns and good luck to you.
Oh
and
my
so,
God,
I
that's
pursued
hilarious.
that career. And, now for 40 years, we've been busy doing medically supervised fasting and using a whole plant food diet to help people recover their health.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. So many thoughts. Like, first of all, Dr. Lyle seems a lot taller than you. I don't know. Is he
We're the
a lot
same height.
taller? You're the same height.
We're the same height, but he's about 30 pounds or 40 pounds lighter than I am.
He
So
looks
he's a skinny
lanky.
guy, but boy, he's really good.
He's good basketball player.
Oh, it's
Oh
really
my
good.
gosh. And gefilte fish, that is like the most disgusting thing you could eat if you were going to eat any animal products. I don't even think.
Well, not since I was 16. So I've had 49 years on a completely vegan diet. So, I'm going to give it another 50 years and see how it works out.
See how it goes. So did your family ever come along? Did they ever decide to go vegan, or anybody in your family?
Well, my dad, when I first got into practice, I'd gone through school. He'd been very supportive, and then he had not been living a health promoting diet and lifestyle. He started having TIAs, and he got to the point where he couldn't remember the name of his grandkids. He had to retire from teaching. At that point, he came into the center, fasted for 26 days, had a fabulous recovery. 20 years later, he helped edit The Pleasure Trap. So he was really one of my first and most successful patients, did very well. My mother, at 92, she realized she had outlived all of her lifelong friends. All of them were dead, including the ones that used to make fun of her for going on her son's ridiculous diet. And she said that it was getting harder to make new friends because at 90, even the people 10 years younger were still too old to do what she wanted to do and play bridge and whatever. And so she said, Alan, you have to warn your patients, if they're going to eat like this, they need to make younger friends. And she said, not just a little younger, a lot younger, or pick a couple that are health conscious, the little people left at the end.
Oh my gosh. That's so funny. You said your dad was having TIA. What does that stand for?
Transient ischemic attacks, so little mini strokes. He was, he was really he was in big trouble at that point. But post-fasting, he normalized his pressure, he normalized his function. And as I said, he did very well to advanced age. So, we were grateful that he was willing to adopt his health promoting diet.
That's really amazing. Can you explain a little bit of okay, so we said in the intro that you do supervised water only fasting at True North. What can you explain, like, the science behind it? Why does this work, and what kind of disease states is it useful for?
Sure. Well, today people are sick and suffering and dying from a limited number of conditions. These are conditions that, interestingly enough, are all associated with dietary excess. People get fat, they develop visceral fat, which is the fat that accumulates around the organs and the belly. And it has a pro-inflammatory component that acts like a tumor. So people, like, literally, if they're 20 pounds overweight, have the equivalent of a 2-pound tumor in their abdomen, giving off hypermetabolic products, inflammatory products that contribute to certain diseases like cardiovascular disease and high blood pressure, diabetes, autoimmune diseases, and cancers like lymphoma. Now, these conditions are the leading contributing cause of death and disability, but they're treated as if they're completely separate conditions. You have to actually go to a different doctor to even be diagnosed with them or treated with them. And yet they're all associated with the inflammation associated with the excess fat and the excess visceral fat. So it turns out it's not shocking that when you fast, you lose fat and preferentially visceral fat. So, for example, in a study we recently did using a DEXA scanner, we took individuals that fasted for 2 weeks on average, and they lost 10% of their entire body load, but they lost 20% of their entire fat load and 40% of their visceral fat. So the body was preferentially going in and mobilizing this tumor-like visceral fat. And as a consequence, they normalized their blood pressure, they normalized their blood sugar levels, were able to get them off their medications. And for those willing to do dangerous and radical things like eat well and exercise and go to bed on time, they're able to sustain those results. We recently did a study with our colleague from the Mayo Clinic where we took 27 subjects with hypertension, and 26 of them were able to entirely normalize their blood pressure without medication. The 27th required half-dose medication. And they were able to sustain that at 6 weeks. And then we followed these people for a year. And it turned out that 76% of the follow-up patients were able to maintain their weight loss, and the majority were able to maintain normal blood pressure without medication a year later. Now, they weren't all perfect, but they did well enough to keep their weight off and their blood pressure normalized. And it turns out it works with type 2 diabetes, and it even works with conditions like lymphoma, which is a type of lymph cancer. And we've published not only case reports, but also case series now in the British Medical Journal looking at long-term effects, including one patient we have has 10 years cancer-free now, and is willing to do the diet and lifestyle changes in order to sustain the results.
And the diet and lifestyle changes are whole food, plant-based, oil-free, sugar-free. What else?
So they're exclusively whole plant food diets that's free of SOS. SOS is the international symbol of danger, but it also stands for salt, oil, and sugar. Salt, oil, and sugar are not food. They're hyper-concentrated products derived from food that are added back to food to make food taste better. And that's what tasting better means, is that when you put those chemicals in your mouth, more dopamine production happens in your brain. Dopamine is the neurochemical associated with pleasure. So the more dopamine, the better you like something. And the reason your brain does that is because it evolved in an environment of scarcity. In a world of our natural environment, it was hard to get enough to eat. In fact, most people didn't live long enough to reproduce. The people that got enough to eat and didn't get eaten were the winners. They're who your relatives are. They weren't the ones that could, that didn't have the ability to store and conserve fat and their nutrients. And as a consequence, you're designed for this environment of scarcity. But now we've changed the environment. Think about this. For 200,000 years, people lived on whole plant foods. That's what they ate. At limited amounts of animal foods perhaps, but there was no refined carbohydrates, there were no processed foods. 200 years ago with the Industrial Revolution, we changed our diet from whole foods to ultra-processed foods and dramatically increased the amounts of animal food in the diet. And as a consequence, now we've had increasing amounts of obesity where 72% of the people now are overweight or obese. If you're not overweight, you're actually abnormal today. And that extra weight and the extra visceral fat that goes along with it is why people die from diseases that used to be so rare. They used to be called the diseases of kings, because it was only the wealthy elite kings that could overeat consistently enough to get the heart disease and the gout and the other conditions. And now these conditions are endemic because we have a condition of dietary excess. We eat salt, oil, and sugar added to our food. It fools our brain. We overeat, and then we get fat. We get the visceral fat, and we die unnecessarily, prematurely, from diseases of dietary excess.
Yeah. It sounds like we've gone into the pleasure trap territory. So maybe we should talk about that, because that's a seminal book. If people haven't read The Pleasure Trap by Dr. Goldhamer and Dr. Lyle, it's it's an incredible book. And I know that I always see pictures of people at True North reading this book, lying around, because I know when they're fasting, they're encouraged to relax, not exert themselves. So let's talk about the pleasure trap a little bit.
The
What are
pleasure trap's the hidden
y-
force that undermines health and
right?
happiness. It's the reason why people are fat, sick, and miserable. And it involves this artificial stimulation of dopamine in the brain that comes from the chemicals added to food like salt, oil, and sugar. It's not real complicated. It's just really difficult to get out of, because once you're addicted to drugs, whether it's alcohol or caffeine or cocaine, uh, or addicted to the artificial stimulation of dopamine from salt, oil, and sugar, quitting is difficult. The hallmark of addiction is that when you quit, you go through withdrawals. And believe me, people don't just withdraw from stopping alcohol or cigarettes, caffeine. They also withdraw when they try to stop using sugar, oil, and salt. It's a very challenging
Oh
transition. And
yeah.
that's where fasting can be helpful. Where we do medically supervised fasting, it can help people get through that cycle. And then good foods start to taste good.
Yeah, you know what? I think I know that that's correct because I when I switched to a whole food plant-based diet 10 years ago, I just dove right in. I didn't fast, but I literally found out I had heart disease. I bought the book Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease and the cookbook. I just
Mhm.
started cooking out of it. I didn't have one last fat meal for the road or anything like that. I was just like, I don't want to die. I'm going to just do this. And so I did it 100%. And I would say it was difficult, but well, I
Well, it
think
took you
that
about a
just
month to
diving in. What?
It took you about a month to neuroadapt to a low
Mhm.
salt diet. It took you probably a couple months to adapt to a low fat diet. It happens a little quicker with fasting,
Mhm.
but it happens whether you fast or not. It just, you have to stick to it long enough in order for your body to neuroadapt.
Yeah, exactly. Juliana Hever said a few weeks ago when I interviewed her, she said, "It's very simple, but it's not easy." And I was like, "That's such a good way to put it." I love that because it wasn't easy, but it was simple. I mean, like if you just do it. I probably should have fasted. Um, so there's three main things that go along with the pleasure trap. The pleasure seeking, that's where we're adapted to seek
Right,
pleasure so we could procreate and eat and all that, and then pain avoidance and energy conservation. Can you
right.
just talk about those a
So
little bit?
pleasure seeking is pretty obvious. So the brain rewards the body when the body does things that favor survival and reproduction. That's how the body gets to make sure you eat enough. Like if you weren't reinforced for eating, you might not eat enough calories and then you would die. So you're heavily reinforced, and that works great, except that in the modern world, we've learned to artificially concentrate the calories in foods by using salt, oil, and sugar. So we
Mhm.
fool the brain. It's just like drug addiction. You get an artificial stimulation that results in an addictive response. So now you're having to do it not just to try to feel good, but to avoid feeling very bad, kind of the hallmark of addiction, which is withdrawal. So pain avoidance is pretty obvious. If you do something that hurts, the brain signals you and gets the body to stop doing it. So, for example, you touch the hot stove, you pull your hand away, and hopefully you learn not to be touching the hot stove. And then energy conservation isn't so obvious, but it's critical because in the environment of scarcity that we evolved, people that wasted their energy didn't survive to reproduce. So people that were able to conserve their energy, because the truth is the limiting factor biologically is getting enough to eat. In a natural setting, it's tough business. And so we're designed to eat as much as we can, whenever we can, of the most concentrated foods that are available. And in a natural setting, that's good. That allows you to survive. But in the modern world of hyper concentrated foods, ultra processed foods, you're in trouble because if you eat to your satisfaction of those foods, you're going to get fat. And if you get fat, you're going to have visceral fat. It's going to produce inflammation. You're going to die like most people do prematurely. Worse than dying, though, is they're going to become debilitated. And people spend the last between 10 and 16 years of their life often compromised. They find themselves unable to talk or move, lying in a nursing home bed, waiting for people to come and change their diaper because they've had a stroke or a heart attack or premature cancer. And as a consequence, it's not just living longer that we're concerned about. More importantly, it's living better. We want to have a good life, good long life, hopefully, but also a good death where you go to sleep and don't wake up and not spend the last decade or two of your life dependent on everybody around you.
Yeah. I know. I just kind of saw this all firsthand, with my mom. She kind of went through this. She was a prolific dieter. She lived her life on the Atkins diet, which is, the precursor to the
May
dreaded
his fillet of
keto
soul
diet.
rest in peace.
Hmm. Exactly. Yeah, Dr. Atkins. Uh, and she was on 10 medications and just couldn't do it, spent 22 hours a day in a recliner and lived in a place where she had to be wheeled down for meals. And
But
uh,
she was
it,
inspirational to you because now you've decided not to follow in her
yeah,
footsteps. And so it motivates you to do the right thing. So that's good.
yeah, exactly. I call her my cautionary tale and I hate that, but it's true. Um, okay. So is fasting the best way to extend health and therefore life?
Well, health results from healthful living. So it's diet, sleep, exercise. Fasting can be a useful tool to help recalibrate the system, to normalize taste and adaptation, to do some detoxification, to help people get off medications. But fasting won't result in health unless it's followed by diet, sleep, and exercise.
Mm,
So
mm,
diet, sleep, and exercise
yeah.
are the key. Whether you fast or you don't fast, most things will recover over enough time. But to get people to make those changes, fasting can be very helpful.
Okay, I get that. So, you talked about sleep and exercise. I think I do the worst in the sleep area, and I know you're making the face at me. I
Got to
know.
change because sleep is
Uh,
one of our most important activities. It's where the anabolic cascade of hormones that trigger healing takes place. It's where your ADP becomes ATP and where energy comes from. If you don't get enough sleep, you're not going to function at your full potential. You're not going to be as healthy or happy as you would be otherwise. And that means you need to learn to sleep in a cool, dark, and quiet place so you're not disrupted, that you go to bed early and sleep later so that you can get that 8 hours of sleep or 7 hours of sleep that you need, and that you don't eat 3 to 4 hours before you go to bed. Because when people eat right before they go to bed, they don't sleep as well. They're having to wake up, empty their bladders. It's very disruptive. So if we don't eat 3 to 4 hours before you go to bed, that means you're going to have a 12 to 16 hour fast every single day. That type of intermittent fasting or time restricted feeding can be very helpful at improving the sleep quality and ultimately your health.
Okay, I think I get enough hours, but I think and I don't eat before I go to sleep, but I think what I do poorly is I fall asleep with the TV on. Like I love to
Mm.
just get in my bed, snuggle up, put on like, Seth Meyers or Jimmy Kimmel, whatever, watch TV, fall asleep. And I know that that's not right.
Yeah.
What does that do to you
So
when
what
you
you
fall
might want
asleep
to
with
do
the
is, if
TV
you're going to
on?
watch TV, whatever, that's fine. But then, when it comes time to go to sleep, you might instead develop some relaxation techniques, do some meditation for 10 or 15 minutes, and then go to sleep. Not as good going to sleep to the stimulatory effect. You're going to get a better quality sleep if you allow yourself to wind down, get rid of the blue light, et cetera,
The
right before
blue
you go to
light.
bed.
What does that blue light do to you? Is it keep you
It's supposed to
stimulated?
interfere with your ability to get into the non-REM deep sleep that you're looking for and get that recuperative phase. So, again, I don't know
Okay.
how significant it is. The research on it isn't really clear, but probably a better idea to kind of wind down without having to rely on electronic media for the last few minutes before you're going to bed.
Dang it. Come on. Tell me what I want to
Basically,
hear.
anything that you find that gives you joy or comfort, we're probably going to take it away from you.
I know. I know that about you. You're like the Grinch, but you give health, so you're really not the Grinch. I know you're
Well, it's
doing
really
it.
will forgive you no matter what hell you put them through as long as they have a good result. So,
It's true.
fasting can be an intense and miserable experience. Yet if people get well, they end up having a net positive effect of the
That's
process.
true.
And the
That's
same thing
true.
with diet. It's not easy adopting a health promoting diet in a world designed to make you fat, sick, and miserable. And so if you
Hmm.
do this, not only will you be successful, but you'll probably also piss off a lot of people. And so, that's particularly true, I think, for women. They have even more difficulties than men do, just because of the way society treats women and deals with women. So, if you're, and women have also a harder time losing weight than men. And that's not psychological, it's biological.
Right.
Women are energy conserving fat storage devices, biologically speaking. They're full of estrogen, which is a fat storage hormone. And it's there for a reason. It's because women are the only people biologically capable of reproducing. And they have to be able to store fat in order to survive a period of biological vulnerability called pregnancy. And as a consequence, a healthy woman is going to have 5% or more additional fat on their body than a healthy male. A healthy male is full of testosterone, which is a fat burning hormone. If you inject women with a bunch of testosterone, their fat would melt off them. But they would get hairy and get cancer and die, so it wouldn't be a very good thing. If you inject men with enough estrogen, they get fat, they grow breasts, they get hips. These are biological differences, not psychological differences. So what does that mean if you're a woman trying to lose weight? It means you work twice as hard, you get half the results. So, get used to it.
That's okay. We're used to it. We also earn less money
It's not just
and
weight
do
loss,
more
it's
work.
everything else too. So,
It's everything. It's
adapt.
fine. We're used to it. Yeah. Like to see some of that change. I guess we're not going to see the weight loss part though change anytime
No,
soon.
I'm
That's always
afraid
going
not.
to be harder. But what about exercise? Do we need, what kind of exercise do we need, especially as we're aging?
Yeah, exercise is really important. You have to build flexibility, strength, balance, and endurance. And so the best exercises, in my opinion, are whole body exercises: walking, hiking, biking, swimming, dancing. And I think a variety probably is better. Now, I have to say, I don't practice what I preach here. I like to play basketball. So I'm playing full court basketball, 4 times a week. I like basketball. I should probably do a variety of other activities, but it's so much fun to play basketball. It's hard to justify using the time for, boring stuff. But in any case, the best advice is walking, hiking, biking, swimming, dancing, getting a variety of activities that will build strength, flexibility, endurance. And if you do that, you're able to sustain your function. You don't get the sarcopenia, you don't get the atrophy, you don't increase your risk for the osteoporosis and the other problems. But the problem is that you can get enough to eat and not get eaten in our society and not even move around. Do you know that men now often don't exercise at all? They hire other people to exercise for them. It's called the
What?
NFL.
Oh,
The NFL is essentially an organization where you sit in an overstuffed chair drinking high-caloric beverages, and then you hire other people to engage in mock warfare, and you pretend like you're part of the winning coalition. Go Rams.
I know. My husband just starts jumping up around and screaming. And I'm like, calm down. I don't think they're going to ask you to suit up. You're okay.
That
Like,
may
you
be
can
the
sit down
only
and
exercise
relax.
he's getting is jumping
No,
around and
that's
screaming.
he runs. He actually still runs, and we go to yoga. I'm shocked that he has really taken to yoga. That was something I did
That's good.
without him
But
for like
yoga's good, flexibility,
25
strength,
years.
etc.
Yeah.
Combine that with some aerobic activity,
Yeah.
and that then you can be achieving your exercise needs. Exercise is also important. Helps you dissipate the effects of stress. Helps improve sleep quality. Exercise does a lot of things. Our ancestors never had to join clubs and stuff because in order to survive, they got hot, they got cold, they got thirsty, they got hungry, they didn't want to get eaten. They had to move around. They also didn't have any trouble figuring out when to go to sleep because it got dark. They went to sleep. They got light. They woke up. And those that wanted to stay up at night partying, they got eaten. So
Yeah.
those are not your ancestors. That's not how we're evolved. And then
I
as far as
know.
diet, they ate as much as they could of whatever was available. What was typically available was whole foods.
Hmm. Yeah. That that made me think of some of the things that kind of go along with maybe fasting, or like, can you explain about autophagy and telomeres? That Can you explain what
Yeah,
that
sure.
is?
So, Yoshinori Shumi won the Nobel Prize in Medicine 2018 for his work on autophagy. Autophagy is essentially how the body gets rid of cancer cells and takes old and decrepit cells and breaks them down and recycles the material. And so there's some things that increase autophagy, like fasting. It's interesting, if you take rats and you periodically fast them, they will live twice as long as rats, everything else being equal, that are not periodically fasted. Because it's a dietary excess that results in premature death and disability. And fasting and exercise both have one thing in common: they get rid of the consequence of dietary excess. So as I said, fasting preferentially mobilizes the visceral fat, helps break down the tumors. That process is stimulated by this autophagy, this immune system's response to fasting and to exercise.
So is autophagy kind of like cleaning up the cells and cleaning house? Is that basically
Yeah,
what it is?
autophagy, self-eating. So it's basically how the
Oh,
body gets those cells, breaks them down into their component parts, and gets rid of them.
okay.
So you're
And
forming cancer cells every day. Your body's trying to get rid of them every day. If you get rid of them faster than they form, you stay healthy. They form faster than you get rid of them, you start growing tumors. So
okay.
you want to do what you can to minimize the inflammatory products and also maximize autophagy. Sleep, diet, exercise, fasting, those are all proven things to improve the body's ability to heal itself.
Okay. And so we talked a little bit about intermittent fasting. So even if you just stop eating 3-4 hours before you go to bed and
And you
then you
maybe
get it.
delay breakfast until you do a little exercise in the morning. That'll maximize weight loss.
So what, 16 hours? What do you think
So
is a good?
somewhere between 12 and 16 hours. There's a lot of evidence supporting the 12 hours. There's a little bit less research supporting the 16. We advocate a 16-hour fasting window for people trying to lose weight and a 12-hour fasting window for kids or people trying to gain weight.
Okay. What if you're just trying to maintain 12
So somewhere
hours?
between 12 and 16 hours. And you can
Okay.
experiment and see what works, best in your life. But the most important thing is don't eat 3 to 4 hours before you go to sleep.
Okay. That is one thing my husband does. Like I said, he runs and he does yoga and but he eats before he goes to bed. He's like
Well, he needs
snacky.
to stop that, and then he might
I know.
find that he functions even better. He doesn't have to wake up as much at night, and there may be a lot of benefits that he'll start to achieve.
Okay. I'll discuss that with him. He already knows that. Like we both know all the things we need to do. I think like everybody else, it's just
Well, you got to
get
explain
some
to him, though, that
benefit.
he's getting older now, and you need him to get healthy because you don't have to be breaking in another one. You spend a lot of work breaking him, and you don't have
That's
to go
right.
through the whole process all over
Yeah.
again.
I got him just the way I like him.
Yeah,
You're right.
exactly. So you
I'll
want to keep
tell
him
him
that
that.
way.
I'll tell him that. And then telomeres. Can you tell us about
Yeah,
telomeres?
they noticed that one of the aging processes that the telomeres tend to shorten, and so they look for things that will
What are
slow
they?
down the
What are telomeres?
components in the cell, little cellular components. How reliable that is debatable. Whether what they're always trying to do is come up with like fasting mimicking drugs. Because fasting will increase telomere length. They want to come up with a drug that'll increase telomere length. So something you can take that'll do what fasting does, but without actually having to go through the fasting process. Because you can't sell that, but you can sell pills, potions, powders, and treatments.
Yeah, exactly.
So
But
everybody's looking for biomarkers that predict aging or predict health, and there's interesting work being done there.
but telomeres are what? They're part of your DNA? Are
So they're
they
a cellular component. They can measure the end tips of those components are supposed to be correlated with the aging process.
so is that like a predictor of how well you're going to age or
Supposedly how well or how long, but again, I don't know that the evidence is overwhelmingly compelling in
Mm,
terms of how reliable that's going to be for an individual.
okay,
It's still
got it.
in kind of the research stage, not so much in the where you can go out and do clinical measurements and have a reliable indicator.
Okay, got it.
What I can tell you,
S-
though, there are
what?
biomarkers, for example, lipoprotein little a, which
Oh
was thought to
no.
be untreatable. Lipoprotein little a is a biochemical marker to predict cardiovascular disease. You can do a blood test. If your lipoprotein little a, which is a component of cholesterol, elevated, that's a bad thing.
Yeah, I
But the
got
thing
that.
is, people have elevated lipoprotein little a, but there's no pill that lowers it. There's no treatment. So like Medicare will pay for you to do one test, but they won't pay for repeat testing because there's no treatment until now. And we've just published a paper, our first paper, second paper is in review right now, that shows that lipoprotein little a profoundly reverses with fasting.
Oh,
So, for example,
really?
we had a long-term vegetarian. Even though he's on a vegetarian diet, lipoprotein little a was elevated, as was cholesterol and blood pressure. We fast as expected, cholesterol and blood pressure normalized, but his lipoprotein little a also reduced by 40%, and he was able to sustain that. And then we just did another long-term vegan who had normal values, normal weight, but had elevated lipoprotein little a and cholesterol. 100-point drop in lipoprotein little a after just 5 days on water-only fasting. So now we're looking at a whole bunch. In fact, I just got another 28% reduction on another patient that we have fasting on follow-up. So what we've realized that even though there's no drug that treats it, there is a treatment, and that's water-only fasting.
Oh no, that's wow, because I have
The
that.
other thing we're
Mine's
treating a
really
lot
bad.
of now that was thought to be untreatable or has been unsuccessfully treated is long COVID. And COVID vaccine injured patients, people that have got damaged from accepting the COVID vaccines or that had COVID but never recover. About 10% of people that get COVID end up with residual long-term effects, loss of smell, loss of taste, fatigue, brain fog, etc. And we just published our first paper of a person who went through 2 years of hell with long COVID, fully recovered after fasting. And so now we're trying to publish a number of those papers. Because it's relatively new, it's taken us a while to get those follow-up data. But now
Mm.
those papers are being submitted, And so it does look like we have an effective treatment for long COVID.
Wow. Do you have a certain protocol for how long you fast somebody, or is it very individualized?
It is very individual, but it ranges from anywhere from 5 to 40 days. We do not fast over 40 days. What the gentleman I studied with, Dr. Burton in Australia, used to fast people 60 days, sometimes as long as 100 days. And when I went there, this was 40 years ago, I asked Dr. Burton, I said, how come we aren't fasting people over 40 days now? Because at that point, he had started capping it at 40 days. And he said, because of the severe sleep deprivation. And I said, are you saying they have more trouble fasting after 40 days? He goes, not the patients, me. And so the problem is, as you get over 40 days into a longer fast, it gets a lot more delicate electrolyte balance and whatnot. So you have to be a lot more concerned. Whereas if you keep the fast shorter, what we call shorter, up to 40 days,
pretty long.
You don't run into those, complications. And we've published fasting safety data showing that you can do this safely and effectively in a controlled setting. I do want to mention, though, not everybody's a candidate for fasting. Everybody that does fast should, at first, history exam, lab, and monitoring, make sure you're a good candidate for fasting. If you're going to fast, you have to rest. If you don't rest, you're going to increase gluconeogenesis, which is the breakdown of lean tissue, which you don't want to do, instead of breaking down fat. And you have to carefully refeed, or you can get post-fasting edema refeeding syndrome, which could even be theoretically fatal in long fasting. So, we've been able to successfully do this 25,000 times in a row, but we do it in a controlled setting with careful monitoring. For people that are interested in fasting, if they really want to understand fasting and the 22 papers we've published in the peer-reviewed literature, they really should read our book, Can Fasting Save Your Health? They can get it on Amazon. They can get it from our website. It's a very thoughtful book. The principal author is Tasha Myers, who's our director of research, and she's really skilled because she can take a very complex subject but make it understandable. And I think she's done that in Can Fasting Save Your Life? It's written so that the average reader can understand what's going on with fasting, but it's also written credible enough that you can give it to your doctor and they will realize you're not necessarily a whack job just because you're looking at doing something like fasting.
Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes so that people can get that.
We're real excited. It just came out, a few months ago, but it's a really unusual book because it does cross that line between being accessible to the average reader, but also credible to a researcher or a clinician.
Mm-hmm. You were just talking about, so clearly, I mean, you don't want people to go off and fast for themselves, like a long fast. That seems.
We want everybody to fast for themselves for 12 to 16 hours every day. But if you're going to do a longer fast, whether you're going to do it at home or you're going to do it at a place like True North Health Center, you still have to, number one, make sure you're a good candidate with history exam, lab, and monitoring, and that you do the fast properly in a restful state and that you recover properly. We do have doctors that can work with your local doctor to help you do this remotely if you're a good candidate for that. And the way to determine that is simple. We offer a free consultation. If you go on to our website and fill out the registration forms, I will do a free phone conversation with you to determine, are you a good candidate for that? Is that something that would be worth considering? And to point you in the direction of a doctor, whether it's remote or whether it's at the center or another facility that does fasting supervision, will help you make sure you do it right and don't make a mess of it.
Okay. I'll put that in the show notes too. I'm making a note so I don't forget. Okay. That's really good. And so, some of the other things, so I think we covered that, well, why you mentioned like lymphoma. Does this seem to work on other cancers as well, fasting, or is that just?
I can tell you the reason we've been successful at publishing both case reports and case series in lymphoma is because it's well accepted that the treatment for lymphoma, the chemotherapy for lymphoma does not reduce all-cause mortality. So it's not making people live longer. So it's not considered unethical to, get people well. Whereas if you're treating conditions where they have what's considered accepted standard of practice, chemotherapy, radiation, whatever, to defer that so that you can get well is considered unethical because that's not the standard of care. In the case of lymphoma, the reason the British Medical Journal was willing to publish our case report is because it's not considered unethical to do a watch and wait with that particular condition. So we have not published in some of the other cancers. And also, quite frankly, lymphoma is very different than, say, breast cancer. And so it's much more responsive. Things turn around more quickly. So it's a much easier to work with. With something like prostate cancer, breast cancer, you have to do really long-term outcome studies in order to determine whether what you're doing is helping, more and how much it's helping. So that should be done, and hopefully it eventually will be done, but hasn't been done yet.
But you have fasted people with those conditions and helped them.
Oh, absolutely, we do. We have, right now at the True North Health Center, we have probably 15 people with some form of cancer history, out of the 70 people that are there. So it's certainly a common thing we do, but we haven't published long-term outcome data. So it's difficult to know how effective fasting is in some of these other conditions. At least in the case of lymphoma, we've got, a number of case series that we've been tracking. And as I said, we have some people, we've done 10-year follow-up data, whole body CT showing that they're able to maintain cancer-free state.
Wow. Tell me some of the most fascinating cases you've seen.
Well, our first lymphoma case was a woman, 42-year-old woman, who came to us, had a 2-year history of progressive disease and palpable tumors, upper and lower extremity. And her doctors had assured her that diet didn't matter, that she could eat whatever she wanted, and that fasting they told her, was criminal quackery. So given that kind of medical support, she decided to come to True North Health Center, and she did a 21-day water fast, during which time her tumors disappeared.
Wow.
So we couldn't even feel anything anymore. We sent her back to the oncologist, who looked at her and said, "What happened?" And she said, "I went to the criminal quacks and I did the fasting and the tumors went away." He was like amazed. It did suggest, because her white count was still a little low, that she undergo some gentle chemotherapy. She refused. And then we followed her at 1 month, at 6 months, at 1 year. We did follow-up CT. And then he acknowledged that, she had done, really well. And then what we did is we submitted, first of all, we said, look, we're going to submit this to the BMJ. And we did. And there was a lot of debate, but they did eventually publish the case. But they said, look, you got to follow this woman long term, because, if we give chemotherapy, the tumors go away too, but then it comes back. So you got to show that she can sustain it long term. And so that's exactly what we did. We followed this woman for 3 years, and we told her, listen, you have to stick to a health promoting diet, or it could be fatal, because I will track you down and kill you. And she believed me, and she stuck to the diet, maintained her weight. And at 3 years, she was able to, we did whole body CT scan, and was, still cancer free. And then we followed her for 10 years. And so now we have 10-year follow-up data. She continues to be cancer-free.
Wow.
So she went public with her story, and then we started getting a lot of lymphoma patients. So then we put a series of lymphoma patients, including one gentleman who had chemotherapy, but it failed. And then he also responded to long-term fasting. And then we had a gentleman who had a worse condition, actually already metastasized into the bones and whatnot. He did a 3-week fast against his oncologist's advice, went back to the oncologist, who said, oh my goodness, you need to do more of that. Came back, did a 39-day water-only fast, and he continues to make improvement. And we have long-term outcome data on him. So that case series has now been published. And so
how long has that been?
That we published that earlier in the year. And then,
but I mean,
now
how long has that guy been cancer-free?
Oh, we've had multi-year follow-up now.
Wow.
So these are all the ones I'm talking about are all long-term follow-up. We had a lot of people with short-term. And I've also had people that have done well fasting, but go back to the conventional diet and lifestyle, and then their lymphoma comes back. So It's not that you're curing lymphoma. You're just managing it with the diet and lifestyle rather than, chemotherapy. So you still have to be willing to do those things like eat well, live well, and get healthy, because that's all you're doing is shifting the body's immune system so it heals faster than you're getting sick. I'm quite confident if I took my patient that was 10 years free, put her back on a conventional diet, we could eventually get that lymphoma to manifest again.
We could get it back.
It's just like obesity.
Really
you don't cure obesity. You can lose 100 pounds and keep it off. Go back to eating greasy, fatty, slimy, processed food. You're going to get fat again. Mm-hmm. There's no cure of obesity. The high blood pressure. We did a study, 174 consecutive patients. 174 people achieved pressure low enough to get rid of the meds. But if you go back to the salty processed foods, you'll get your blood pressure back. You're not cured, you're managed. Yep. And so that's the thing, is people got to give up the model of cure and start focusing on what can I do to get healthy enough so my body can get healthier faster than I'm getting sick and old.
Right. Yes, it's true.
Fasting can be a tool, but it's not going to be effective long-term unless you combine it with healthful living, diet, sleep, and exercise.
Yeah. All those things that are just a little bit sometimes difficult to do, but
really difficult to do. That's one of the most difficult things you can ask a patient to do. Adopt a diet and lifestyle that's healthy in a world that's designed to make them fat, sick, and miserable. And even when they're successful, you think it's easy? No, people will get all pissed off, you and your thin body and your perky smile. You make them sick. And they will give you nothing but, problems. It's really, there are a lot of haters out there, and they'll be more than happy to get all over you. And the more successful you are, the more they'll get their annoyances.
What do you have advice for people for trying to stick to this lifestyle? Is it fasting?
Well, I
What?
think fasting is a useful tool to get people to the point where they can tolerate the diet and lifestyle changes, where the good foods start to taste good. At first, when you're addicted to the artificial stimulation of salt, oil, and sugar, good foods are disgusting, tasteless swill. People can't even imagine how anybody could choke down fruits and vegetables and things like that. But once you're done fasting, or once you've eaten the diet for a long enough period of time, you get where it's actually preferential. So it doesn't take discipline forever. You just have to do it long enough to actually get well. But a lot of people are really buried deep in the pleasure trap, and it's really difficult to escape. Think about this. If you're an alcoholic and you go to the inpatient program and you have 90 visits in 90 days to a 12-step program, and you have family support, 83% of those people will be back drinking within a year. If you're a heroin addict and the court mandates you go to inpatient care, 90% of those people will be shooting heroin within a year. And so you think, oh, that's not very good success rate, 90% failure. But if you go to a doctor and ask them to use any available weight loss strategy to lose 5% of body weight, within a year, 95% of those people will have failed. So it's actually, you have probably better chances of solving heroin addiction than you do using conventional methods, because the way we treat obesity in our society up until recently was tell people to eat less. And that doesn't work too well. It's like telling alcoholics, well, just drink beer and wine, and you won't be a drunk anymore. The failure rate is 99%. And the failure rate of treating obesity, where their BMI is over 40, is 99%. It's because we tell people, put your food on a smaller plate, change the color of your meat from red to white, chop your food in little bits, put the fork down between each bite, you won't be overweight anymore. It doesn't work. The only thing that works for alcoholism is to stop drinking. And the only thing in my experience that works for obesity long-term, healthfully, is to stop eating the chemicals that fool your brain, satiety mechanisms, and those are salt, oil, and sugar. So if you eat a whole plant food diet, you will lose weight. If you're a woman, you can expect 2 pounds a week down to optimum weight. If you're a male, about 3 pounds a week down to optimum weight.
Yeah.
And that works, and it's sustainable as long as you do the diet. You go back to eating the chemicals, you're going to fool your brain, and then you're going to regain the fat. And so it's not what people want to hear. They don't want to hear, well, what do you mean? Like, you think alcoholics, if you tell them you have to completely quit drinking, they think, oh, that's what I want to do? No, that seems radical and extreme. And in fact, the biggest problem with alcoholics is they've been sober for a while, and then they start thinking, well, I'm better now. I can drink normally. I can just have a little bit, and of course, the next thing they know, they're waking up under the Golden Gate Bridge naked, wondering how they got there. So the reality is, if you're an alcoholic, you need to not drink. And if you're overweight and you're having trouble with overweight, you need to not eat the chemicals that are making you fat. And those chemicals are salt, oil, and sugar.
So was that your advice? Don't eat it? What's your advice to try to make it easier?
Fast to save your life. Adopt a whole plant food SOS-free diet. See if it's worth being healthy. And if it's not, go back to eating greasy, fatty, processed junk.
But you don't have any tips to try to make it easier because so many people struggle.
The thing that makes it easier is understanding how it works, number one. Yeah. Once you understand the pleasure trap, that definitely helps. It doesn't make it easier. I think
that's eye-opening. Sure.
Easier. Two, if you use fasting to help break the addiction, that helps. Just like some people can just quit drinking when they decide to. Other people need to go to a place and get a little bit of help, or quit smoking or whatever. So that depends on the individual. There is no easy way. The best way is to adopt a health-promoting diet and lifestyle. So for one person, that might just be understanding how it works, and they do it. Other people are going to need a little bit of extra help, and fasting or stay at True North Health Center can be that extra help for some people.
Okay.
And some people are not going to do it. It's not like everybody's going to do it. You have to decide what's the value, what's the priority. For some people, short-term pleasure-seeking, self-indulgent behavior is the driving force. That's all they're interested in. Other people are thinking longer term in terms of health and happiness. They're on a happiness model, not a pleasure-seeking model. If you ask a cocaine addict, who gets more pleasure, the cocaine addict or a normal person? Well, cocaine addict gets a lot of pleasure, a lot of dopamine stimulation from the cocaine, but they don't ever get happy, because happiness has nothing to do with dopamine. It's all about serotonin. It's a whole different neurochemical response. So if you want to get happy, you got to get healthy. If you're just looking for short-term pleasure-seeking behavior, well, then cocaine works pretty well.
Yeah.
10 times the dopamine production is an orgasm during sex. So you can see how reinforcing it might be.
Yep. Yeah. Speaking of, well, I don't know if this is a segue or not, but what do you think of the GLP-1 drugs or like
They're
Ozempic and
unbelievably fabulous in the sense that here's a drug you take now. You have to take it for the rest of your life. It's incredibly expensive. The moment you stop it, you're going to blow up. But you get to keep feeding your addiction ultra processed foods, but the drug will make you so sick you won't eat quite as much. And so short term, you'll lose some weight. And being fat is so dangerous that even the dangers of those drugs may be offset by the benefits of getting rid of some of the fat short term. Now, long term, forget about it. The gastric paresis and all the problems that, in fact, have you noticed they're already starting the class action lawsuits? If you turn on
oh,
the
I knew
television,
they
you'll
were
see
coming.
the
I didn't know,
lawyers
but
advertising for the class action suits. They're already starting the process. So yeah, long term, it's a nightmare, but short term, yes, you can lose weight, even eating the crap. And so when people don't want to give up their highly processed, ultra processed foods, that is a short term way to weight loss. Now, I have another short term way to weight loss. If you get a chainsaw and you cut your leg off right at the hip, that's 40 pounds, just like that. If you
just
take off
gone.
both legs, it's like 80 pounds. So when in terms of quickness, that's even quicker than GLP inhibitors, but neither of them are probably very good from a long term health promoting standpoint.
Maybe the cocaine's better.
Well,
We
heroin
could
addicts, if you look at those people on the cover of those
they're
fashion
skinny.
magazines, a lot of them are very skinny. So if you get sick enough, in fact, what's one of the hallmarks of cachexia cancer? Is weight loss.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
why a lot of
Well,
people are, mistakenly advising people with cancer, oh, well, all you have to do is eat whatever you want as long as you don't lose weight, as if the weight
yeah,
loss was causing the cancer
that's the
rather than the cancer
problem.
causing the weight loss.
Right, exactly. Okay, so I think we know where you stand on the GLP-1 drugs.
Yeah,
Is
I
there
wouldn't be
anything?
recommending for weight loss
No,
strategy.
no. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
Um,
do they work? Yeah,
yes, they do.
absolutely.
Right. Okay,
So if people
got it.
were to say, well, let me use this as a transition to adopt health promoting diet and lifestyle, that might be an argument. That's not what's actually happening though, and that's not how it works. And if you
Right,
do the transition, you lose the weight anyway. If you're on a health promoting diet, if you're a woman, you're losing 100 pounds at your rate anyway. How fast do you need to lose it?
right. Yeah. Okay. So you're going to give us all the answers we don't want. You have to do it the hard way, the healthy way, the turn off the TV at night way, the all the things we don't want to hear. But
What I
yeah,
tell people with food, it's really simple. If you want to know, all you do is you close your eyes and you go and say, do I really, 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 really want it? And if the answer is truly yes, you can't have it. You get nothing. What can I say? Because that's
you're
activating the
no
pleasure
fun.
trap. Yeah, you
I
like
know.
carrots, but you're not going to like scratch somebody's eyes out when they tell you not to have carrots. Chocolate,
No.
it's a whole nother matter. I do say if you want to use chocolate, just melt it down and rub it all over your belly and hips where it ends up. And then when you're done, you can wash it off and not carry it around all week.
You can't have any chocolate.
How fat do
What?
you want to be?
I eat chocolate once in a while, like a dark
People
chocolate.
can get
Oh,
away with a little bit of almost anything
it's
once
a
in a while. The
little bit.
question is,
I
how
don't eat a
healthy do
lot
you want to
though.
be? Some
Okay.
people can have a little bit and not have a lot. For example, can some people have a drink and not become a drunk? Sure.
Yeah.
But if you're a drunk, it's not you. And some
Okay.
people can eat a little bit of cheese and chocolate and not gain weight. But if you're overweight, it may not be you. So you got to know
Okay.
yourself.
You got to know yourself. Well, I don't have any cheese. I can tell you that. Okay. All right. Well, I think you answered a lot of the questions. Basically, if we want it, don't eat it. Okay. Great. Moving on. Let me ask you some fun questions now. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received? It doesn't have to be health or wellness related or age related. Do you have a good piece of advice just for
Yeah,
life?
health results from healthful living. So focus on healthful living, not pills, potions, powders, and treatments.
Okay. I should have known that was going to be. I think we already kind of touched on this. What did you learn from watching your parents age?
Well, I learned that when you live conventionally, it can be a slow and painful decline, and it can be really debilitating. And when you adopt health promoting diet and lifestyle, even later in life, it's like miraculous. And that the more successful you are, the more the haters will hate.
Hate is going to hate. Okay. Do you have a favorite health or beauty product?
Yeah, I think one of the most health promoting products available to us is actually H2O. It's actually pure water. And a lot of people don't consume enough water and they don't maintain hydration. They don't take advantage of the benefits of water. So if I had to pick one product that may be underutilized, I'd say it's water.
How much should we drink? And
Um,
what kind?
right. So you want some kind of purified water. You don't want municipal water with chlorine and hydrogenated halocarbons and whatnot. We use distilled water, but you can also use reverse osmosis. There's lots of different ways of filtering water. But if you think about if the environment was clean, rainwater would be distilled water. That's certainly
Right.
would not be foreign to us. So I think that purification of some kind is necessary, but I don't know that it's mandatory that it be one
Okay.
particular version or another.
And how much?
Well, that'll depend on your diet. When you're eating a really high water content diet, like lots of fruits and vegetables, you're not going to need to drink as much water as people that are eating high protein, animal-based foods. On the other hand, you should drink enough water that your urine's not overly concentrated. If you notice your urine's really concentrated, maybe that's a sign you want to be getting a little bit more water. And the more you exercise, the more you sweat, the more water you're going to drink.
Okay. That's a good rule of thumb. Do you have like a public person that you admire for the way they're aging?
Public person, yes. I have two people that I particularly admire. One of them is the co-author of a number of our studies. His name is T. Colin Campbell, and he's the author of the China study.
Yes.
He's a brilliant professor. He helped us publish our first paper, medically supervised water-only fasting in the treatment of hypertension, and our second paper as well. He's helped us tremendously. And he was very sick. He was, one of his accomplishments is he isolated dioxin, which was the active agent in Agent Orange, and got massive exposure. Developed dystonia, was very ill some decades ago, came to the center, fasted, and got well. And he went public with this story. He talks about it in his books. And so in fact, he wrote the introduction to Can Fasting Save Your Life? And he tells his own personal story and his wife's story with melanoma and recovering with fasting and whatnot. And now he's in his 90s. He is sharp as a tack, doing great. And so even though he was very ill, he's managed to overcome it and continue to live a long, healthy, and productive life. And he's just a real hero of mine. Another one is Caldwell Esselstyn, who's also a gentleman that we had the pleasure of working with. And he's in his 90s now. And again, sharp as a tack, doing productive work and, telling the truth about diet. And so he's another example of, what happens when you really put it to the test.
Yeah, I agree with those two for sure. And then this is the last question, a little out there, but I just like to know for my own personal reasons. What's your favorite concert you've ever been to?
Well, I've only been to one concert.
What?
I've only been to one concert. I was not a person that went out. I had a very focused life. I was very young into school. I started school in my early 20s. I was very young into practice. I've been practicing 40 years. Once we started practice, we never really left the property because it was one of those 24/7 operations. But I did go to one concert. One of my patients invited me to come hear him play with his band. And it was at the Oakland Coliseum, and the group was called the Grateful Dead. And they've changed their name now with the demise of some of their members. But so we went and sat on the stage in the Oakland Coliseum for the one and only concert I attended. It was a very interesting experience. My wife was a little surprised because she knew I wasn't much of a go out, but I asked her if she wanted to come to, and she knew who they were. I didn't know who they were. I mean, other than the individuals that I was treating. And so it was kind of an experience, but it was like going back to the 60s because they had a lot of marijuana smoke in the thing, and it was very, kind of. But at that point, they already were on. They had vegetarian food, and they were, they were patients of Dr. McDougall's, and so they were trying to do the right thing. So it was an interesting experience. But that's the only concert I've ever been to.
Was that before or after Jerry Garcia died?
It was before Jerry Garcia passed away.
Okay, so do you know what year that was?
Well, it would have been 2 or 3 years before Mr. Garcia passed. So,
okay, I don't know when that was. 90s?
Yeah.
When did he die? Well, I mean, if you were only going to go to one, that's a pretty jamming one. Pretty good.
I haven't been
Dr.
to another
Goldhamer.
concert since then, but maybe someday I'll go to another one. But
oh my gosh, you cracked me up. Well, I have so enjoyed meeting you. You are. I know you don't want to be a delight, but you kind of are. So. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for
thanks for getting the
all
word
your
out
knowledge.
about the work that we do.
I appreciate it. You take care.
Very
Bye-bye.
good.
Thanks for listening, friend. From my heart to yours, be well until we meet again.